Well, happy Friday. It's time for another installment in our series, The Bible, One Book, One Verse at a Time. And so today we're looking at the book of Job. This book that seems to address the question, why do good people suffer? But in reality, it never really answers that question. Instead, it kind of takes us on a journey through our regular answers to that question and shows us, in fact, that all of the answers we normally give are woefully inadequate when compared to who God really is. Okay, so I admit that that's a bit of a dramatic description of this book, but really that's what this is all about. You get this image of Job, a righteous person who follows God and is successful in that. And then you get this image right at the very beginning on how God is in heaven and the angels come before him and Satan, or the accuser, is there as well. And God says to those who are there, have you seen Job? This person is righteous. And the accuser says, yeah, well, of course he's righteous because you bless him. He's only doing this to get your stuff. He doesn't really care about you. And then God says, fine, then you can take away his stuff and you can harm his body, but you may not take away his life. Now, in all reality, I think the book of Job opens up a whole lot more questions than it answers. I mean, this image in the throne room of God, it doesn't really answer the question on why these things happen. And actually, that's part of what goes on throughout this whole book, because Job and his friends make certain assumptions about God and about their own abilities. So after Job laments and his friends come to be with him, and they stay silent for 7 days, just being there for him, which, by the way, is probably the best way to handle the suffering of a friend. Job cries out in his grief and he accuses God essentially of either being unjust or of being incapable of governing the world according to his justice. I mean, he assumes if God is just, then the world, particularly his world, and we'll get back to that, should be run according to what he sees to be justice. Now, his friends make the same assumptions about God and the way the world works. If God is just, and they believe that God is just, then the world works according to justice, including every particular person's life in that particular moment is run according to justice. Therefore, if Job is experiencing suffering, well, then he must have done something wrong to deserve this suffering. And Job says, no, that's not the way this is. I haven't done anything like that. I don't deserve this. I'm not the kind of person that has caused all kinds of pain and so therefore deserves pain. And at one point, Job at the end comes to accusing God, or comes before God himself and demands God to come before him and to answer him and his accusations. Now, surprisingly, God responds. God shows up in this great storm, but instead of answering Job's accusations, he simply takes Job on a tour of the incredible nature of this universe, about the complexity and the hugeness of it, about how God made it and holds it all together, and how God is intimately involved in all of the little details, like the grazing of the goats on the mountains and all of these different kinds of things. He shows Job that the world is far more complex than Job had assumed. And in response to Job's accusations, God basically says, your perspective isn't quite big enough. And that's essentially what God is saying to Job. You don't understand what a just or righteous ordering of the world really is because you can't have the full picture in view. And after that conversation, Job responds in humility. And this brings us to the verses, I guess, which I would say are the key verses. This is Job chapter 42. This is Job chapter 42, verse 5 and 6. My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore, I repent in dust and ashes. So Job says, I did not understand, and maybe I still don't understand, but before I just kind of thought about who you were, now I have seen you, and I trust you in that. Now it's important to remember that the book of Job doesn't end there. Because if you stopped there, you get the impression that Job and his wrestling with God was not appreciated and was not the way to handle going through a time of suffering. When in fact, that's exactly what God says. God says that Job spoke rightly about God, and his friends spoke wrongly. And this is important for us as we go through suffering, as we go through difficulties. It's important for us to remember that we don't have all the answers and we do need to trust God, but that doesn't mean that we can't wrestle with Him. We can trust in what He's doing, even though we don't always understand why He's doing what He's doing, and we can wrestle with Him about it, but we can let Him know the way that we feel and the things that we experience, knowing that in doing so, we are speaking rightly before God. Because what He is after ultimately is our hearts, not just some form of obedience. And so if this has been helpful for you, I'd encourage you to like and to subscribe to our YouTube channel and share this with someone else who might need some encouragement to know that it's okay to wrestle with God.